So just to let everybody know logistically, this is going to be kind of interesting because I'm actually presenting to a group in person here, and I'm actually presenting to people online at the same time. So everybody here is going to probably see me look like Tony Robbins with my mic in my ear as I'm kind of going through the process and that. So let me just get going. There we go. All right, so a few logistics as we get started here. So that's going to update. First, just like I said, I'm going to be presenting both in person and via webinar. For those people attending the webinar, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A module on the GoToWebinar. Have a couple guys from my team that are actually sitting back during those, and they will ask those questions. So for everybody, just logistically, if a question gets asked, I'll repeat the question so that everybody hears me across the mic and understands what the question is, and kind of go through that. And just for everybody here, just so that you know, here we're actually, after the hour, we're going to break and have in-person discussion, and we're kind of hoping that that might happen in other locations. So a little bit about me. My name is Virgil Carroll. I'm the CEO and Principal Human Solutions Architect at HiMonkey. And I hail from the great state of Alaska. I've lived in Minnesota for now almost 20 years, so enough that when I say Minnesota, it definitely sounds like a Minnesota accent. Except probably to people in Minnesota. Most people here don't think I talk very Minnesotan, but I've gotten it when I go other places. My background actually has nothing to do with technology. I actually have an undergraduate degree in sports medicine and a graduate degree in instructional design, curriculum development. So I've been working here at Anoka High School for the past 20 years. Since I moved here. I actually started out as a technology consumer, and the reason I say that is because the very first thing I did in technology was actually had somebody build me a website. And really the reason I learned to build websites was because I got tired of paying them in that, because every time I got a change, I got a bill, and so I decided to pick it up myself. So for anybody who's curious, the first tool I ever used was Front Page 98. Boy, that was fun, and I'm glad that things have gotten a lot better since then. The big thing that you're always going to hear from me is I'm huge on user experience. That's one of the main focuses that I bring to the world, and so a lot of the projects that we do in a lot of different areas are really focused around that. I speak about 15 to 20 times a year, like Eric said, sometimes about Kentico, a lot about SharePoint in that. Nobody's throwing anything for that, but we actually do work with that technology. I've been building websites since '98, and I've been working with Kentico since 2005. So we started working with it about 7 months after it actually got released in that, and so we kind of saw it as a good opportunity. So a little bit about HiMonkey. We're a Kentico user group sponsor. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Our key areas really are web and CMS, SharePoint, and UX. We've been around for about 17 years, and we have clients actually all over the world. We do a lot of work not only in Minnesota but a lot of other places. And then KenticoUserGroup.org. Again, you guys are getting quite the delay on my slides here. But this is kind of an effort that we're working with Kentico on, and that is to get more cohesiveness around the community of Kentico. We started it here in Minnesota, about a year and a half ago, and we've been slowly growing it. We actually, for anybody on the webinar, should know that anytime we get between 10 to 25 people at our different events that we do, around that, and we work with some of the other partners in the local community. We just launched a website called KenticoUserGroup.org. We're hoping that part of that will be kind of feeding this format of us doing webinars and then having live discussions. And we're hoping to have bi-monthly events, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that towards the end of it. But really this is about a new collaboration space for Kentico itself, the community, and kind of some opportunities around that. So. Well, let's get into what I want to talk about. So the case study I really wanted to talk about, and the reason I kind of talked about this versus any other project we did is because it's really this project here for Automation Alley. It's a membership organization in Detroit, Michigan, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But really the benefit for me was this allowed me to deep dive into a lot of different areas of Kentico that I was familiar with but hadn't really done a lot of deep diving. It also was a great opportunity to really kind of move forward in the Kentico 8 platform. So this was one of the first projects that we did in the Kentico 8, and really were able to look at some of the new things we could leverage around that. So some of the things that we had just about the client to kind of understand a little bit more about it. Automation Alley is a membership organization. They were formed in 1998 basically because they saw a need in the Detroit marketplace to have greater tech workforce than was currently there. They have over 1,000 member companies, and that's actually very important because that really influences a lot of the things that we had to do from our side to service. They have multiple membership tiers. HighMonkey's a member, and so you have different membership tiers that have different things. They needed to have membership to actually be able to edit and admin their own content, and you could have one admin, you could have 50 admins. Plus then you had member visitors, and I call it member visitors because most of the time when we were talking with the client, we called it members. So otherwise you had the membership company, and then you had the members inside there, people that could actually take advantage of the benefits that was offered as part of that. And then they had events, press releases, and all this kind of stuff that they had that members could serve up and that the organization could serve up. And they had a lot of different avenues of service that they provide out there. So just kind of a little idea about the client. Some of their business pain that we really worked on here. Number one was their old website was in Salesforce. Salesforce, for anybody that doesn't know, actually has their own web thing called the Force. But they were in a very old version of that. And so part of that was that they didn't have any ability to update it in that. There were things like when they wanted to update the price of their membership packages, they actually had to go through Salesforce to actually get that done because they couldn't actually update it. They ended up having to turn off their membership registration because of that process in there. One of the big things that they wanted to do is they wanted to support recurring membership, otherwise that people could sign up and actually have their membership annually renew on a credit card or something like that, something that wasn't currently available. And it was also a very complex process for how their members had to submit content to actually be approved and put onto the site. And part of that was some of the limitations that they had around the current software. So what did Kentico really bring to the table? Well, first we brought the modern CMS. So the version of the Force was about 5 or 6 years old. There actually is a newer version of that out there, which is a lot nicer system. But overall, what Kentico really brought to the equation was the modern CMS. So this was one of the first things that we were able to do in Kentico 8. Anybody who's worked with Kentico prior to version 8 knows that the UI especially was changed significantly from the previous version. E-commerce, they wanted to do a lot of things around e-commerce. Right now they were very limited, but they had events, they had membership packages, they had all these different things. In Kentico 8 especially, the big focus was the e-commerce side of the equation. One thing that I think is very, very important is the ability to separate content and presentation. Otherwise, a lot of times content is going to be needed to be used in a lot of different places in that. And so instead of saying that there's a one-to-one relationship, otherwise I create a page and I have content on there. And if I want to have the same content on another page, I have to create the page and put the content on there. You can actually do that whole process of storing content one place and showing it different using some of the technologies out of there. And there was a lot of the out-of-the-box. So that was one of the big things for us, was actually looking at how far we could leverage the out-of-the-box framework in there, including some of the content contributions, the event booking that we did, some of the newsletter integration, and a lot of the different pieces that we brought into the equation. So what I'm going to spend most of this time is kind of talking about the solution and talking about some of the pros, cons, some of the issues that I ran into really from there. I'm not going to technical deep dive in here, otherwise I'm not going to get into code because we realize that there's a very broad audience and there's probably some people that really want to know how I coded this, and there's other people that their eyes are just going to go lost at that point in time and probably stop listening. So if anybody has any specific coding questions, we can wait and ask. Feel free to ask those later, and I'd be more than happy to answer those. From a project standpoint, there were a few things that we had to do. One, we had to look at a very flexible, responsive design. Kentico's layout engine really gives us the opportunity to build very flexible, responsive designs. It leverages Bootstrap internally. We've kind of leveraged both Bootstrap and Foundation from a functional modular framework in that I'm going to say I like Bootstrap better. My staff pretty much likes Foundation better. It kind of just depends on the day and that kind of stuff. But one of the things that when I do a lot of form-based stuff, Bootstrap just gives a lot more ability to kind of leverage some of their external things. We had to balance the use of complex code in what we could do out of the box. And so one of the things that I really stress And so, again, I'm going to go back to my SharePoint side and say most of the engagements, even today, that we do in SharePoint is coming in after a company has highly customized something and basically made it unmanageable by the client. Otherwise, they can't update things because you have to have a coder on staff and you don't have that. Well, we kind of look at Kentico or really any other platform kind of the same way. Yes, there's always going to be things that you have to code, but overall the goal is to try and do as much with out of the box what you can so that you actually leave something that a client can actually do something with afterwards. And so that was one of the big things here, is that one of their biggest pain points was that everything was so customized in their Salesforce environment that they had very little ability to do updates on a regular basis. So they wanted something that they could really do that kind of stuff. The other thing is they needed to share content across multiple channels, and it wasn't just about different pages showing the same content, but it was also things like their news. They have a daily newsletter that they do that they needed to actually process content that comes off the site from, and that kind of stuff. But the big thing is we really needed to focus on the visitor experience and then also the admin experience, which were almost equally important, because not only did you have people that were visiting site, but you had all these content admins that were all from clients, their members, that needed to be able to manage their membership information, their press releases, their events and all that in a very easy to use interface, because that is really the way that this organization generates revenue, is by having the members join and actually do these different activities. And that. So some of the things that I ran into from Kentico out of the box that provided some challenges that I needed to work through. Number one is the membership product type. So the part of the e-commerce you can actually use for membership is tied to a person, not an organization. So this was something that we had to extend around, because we were not, memberships for this organization were tied to a company, and then each company could have multiple people underneath of it that had access to the membership in that. So it was a very different. So we needed really a one-to-many relationship from that side. We needed to have one member, but then have many member visitors, or members, as I like to call them, inside that. From an event standpoint, we had both paid events, so things that people actually paid for, and then free events. And on top of that, you had both member events and you had organizational events. And on top of that, depending on the type of member you were, you actually had different pricing models. So different membership levels actually got discounts on top of the others. So we had a lot of things around events. Again, we were able to leverage a lot of it, but we had to do some extending out of it. The application process, they have a very extensive application, and then they go through this very extensive process before a member actually becomes a member. So it's not just submit, pay, and you're a member. You have to submit, pay, and then you actually have to go through a very intensive review process, and then your membership gets approved at that point in time. And one of the challenges was, and out of the box with Kentico you can't do this, and that is that none of their payment providers currently support recurring payments. And so that was another big thing to be able to do from that side. So what are some of the things? I'm going to just give you a little high-level view of some of the solutions that we put together and that kind of stuff. First was to try and use out of the box as much as possible. So that was really big, using custom page types, leveraging a lot of the modules that we could use inside of it, including the newsletter, the events module, blogs, and a lot of the things out of the e-commerce. The second thing we needed to do is we did end up needing to extend the API and actually do some custom coding, and I'm going to talk about that at a very high level. And the third thing is I use macros. Now I'll admit I've been working with Kentico for a really long time, but if I was to say before this project how much I'd use macros, it was probably this much. And so anybody online, I'm going really, really small. In this project and kind of going forward, I actually finally got myself out of that whole .NET coder mindset and actually started paying more attention to the macro side and realizing there's a lot of powerful pieces from that. But I'm going to talk about a couple caveats as I talk about the macros and some of the things that I learned from it that you always want to be aware of, because I also see that a lot of people overuse this in my mind, and I'm going to tell you why I kind of say that on that side. So from that side, I'm going to start talking about, so the first thing I want to kind of talk about is the content in that, and from the content, some of the things that we did. So the content side, the nice thing was for the majority of the time, we were able to leverage things that kind of came out of the box. So the first thing we did is we built a lot of custom page types. And so here's the important thing. I go into environments all the time, whether it's Kentico, whether it's Sitecore, whether it's SharePoint and that kind of stuff, And it's really great to use things the exact way they were built out of the box, but there is a disadvantage. What happens if someday I want to do something different? And so I just worked on a project not too long ago that uses the page menu item content type on everything. And yet they actually need to build a search solution that understands the differences between the different type of content. Well, you know, you can do tagging, you can do categorization, you have a lot of different ways, but fundamentally there's no way that we can really tell that this is this type of content versus that type of content versus that type of content. So we like to actually use a lot of page types to define those pieces of content. In day one, you may not need that, but it's what happens day 500 or day 5,000. And so a lot of times when you're approaching these, one of the things I think about is not what you need now, it's also what you need 5 years from now. And so where there might be some processes where you start doing this and it feels like a monotonous building process from your standpoint, from an end user standpoint, it can actually bring a lot of benefit. And so one of the things that it really brought a benefit from is what I like to do, which is content roll-ups. And so Joel Darlene here, and I'm going to say it at the very end, is our next presenter in May, and he's actually going to talk about hierarchical transformations and a lot of things you can do with it. But I'm huge about roll-ups. I'm huge about not building pages with a bunch of page editor web parts and letting people edit all those page editors, but actually keeping content more modularized. And really, one of the biggest benefits from that is, one, from a search aspect, but two, also from a control aspect. If I have something showing up on a page, let's say like what you're seeing on the screen here, these images are actually roll-ups from things that are actually underneath of it. So I know it's kind of hard to see from the picture, but if you look at the home page that I have highlighted, you'll see all these folders with sub-items. Well, none of those sub-items are actually navigable. You don't navigate to them. They're actually things that are controlling the roll-up up onto the screen there. So the pictures, the different things. And what this really gives is it gives a much better, in my mind, editor experience, because I'm not needing to edit a bunch of pictures on the screen, but instead I'm adding a new one and I'm just adding the basic information. And we're somewhat helping control the page editor experience from that side and both take away the potential of user error, which anybody who's ever managed any type of technology knows that actually can happen a lot. To the other side, which is actually having some conformity around the way things are presented. So I like to be able to do that. My favorite thing is to use the repeater for that kind of stuff, and things like the hierarchical transformations that you can do to kind of present all that content in a unified manner. And one of the things I really like about it is that it's very good at facilitating content reuse. So a lot of times we may have things that actually exist one place that we want to pull in different areas, and so we can use that technology really to do that kind of stuff. The other side of it was a content admin. So this was something I did a little bit different. This actual admin screen that you're seeing on here is actually for the client's admin group. But instead of having them actually go and building a bunch of things into the administrative interface of Kentico, we just decided, because of the sheer number of people and the sheer number of things they needed to do, that we'd actually bring it into the page hierarchy, because that actually made it easier for us to roll that content up in there. So a lot of things they're doing is like their events that they manage, their press releases that they manage, actually the template that we use to build out the member profiles, the different membership levels and what those are, and what the pricing is in that. So they have a centralized place that they can visit on the site, that they can actually go in as their admins and actually manage all the things from Automation Alley level versus any of the member companies that are part of it. So they kind of have that, and it really helps to do that. And so one of the really cool things we did with the templates is actually automate out the membership build process. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So it basically a single place where they could go that was secured down to their administrators, that they could go to basically do this administrative stuff versus having to really integrate a lot into the Kentico administrative system. And that. So of course, one of the biggest things we had to do as part of this process was membership. Membership was just huge around this. And there were a lot of challenges around this, and really when we started getting into things that we really had to look at how we were going to customize things, this was one of the main areas. The two main areas that we did a ton of customization was membership and events. And those were things that just kind of really needed that facilitation because of some of the unique things. So the first thing we really worked on was the application itself. And so these guys have a lot of fields. They have a lot of fields on that application, but one of their main complaints about their existing site prior to this was, we can't change it. Well, in accommodating all those large fields, or a lot of fields, and also doing this in the easiest way for me as a developer, I should have done a custom page type or something like that and built my own .NET form and done all that kind of stuff. That wasn't going to work because it's not like they're going to be able to go in and add fields and do things really easy from that side and map it to all the things we did. So instead, we decided to leverage the version 8 forms module, which anybody who hasn't played with it, it's rockin' awesome. It's super simple to do, but from a standpoint of where we had to extend it is we were able to build out this really sophisticated form that had a lot of moving parts, but the part you don't have as much control on is what happened after that form. So the piece that we really had to take from there was to actually do something with that form and integrate it into a process after that and actually use that to help build out the membership profile. There were a couple challenges I did, and I've talked to Kentico about this maybe 5,000 times, and that is cascading drop-downs and that. And we had a good friend help us build one of those. But that's one of the things. So overall, the forms module is really great, but there's just a few of those little things like a cascading drop-down and things that we constantly get requested for in our forms build that just aren't part of it. But I love it because it's a drag-and-drop interface, and so it was actually something that could enable the client to actually go in and actually do drag-and-drop and actually change the form itself. And so part of this, the other side, was that we started looking at when we actually had people pay for the membership, we looked at going through the e-commerce system itself, but we realized that that was actually adding a lot of extra steps to the process versus just actually doing the payment process ourselves. And so that was one of the big decisions we made here. And so one of the things that I really love about Kentico from kind of a developer standpoint is you have all these events that you can tie in to be able to do different things. And so in this particular case, we were basically tying into the event that happened after the form was submitted, and we were able to do something with that and actually then send it to our payment, see what payment it was, pass their information, let them fill out the credit card or whatever they were going to do and that kind of stuff. The other thing that had to happen with this is we also had to let them bypass the payments because, you know, they have membership packages that run from $350 to $17,500. And not many people are willing to put $17,500 on a credit card versus $350. So we actually needed to give them the ability to be able to bypass that yet still have it in their workflow process so that they could still go that, but then at that point it actually became a manual step from there. So overall we were really able to leverage those pieces to be able to really make a really good membership application process. The other thing we were able to do is we had to, again, you might remember I said the two things we had to focus on most was the visitor experience and the member admin experience. Well, the member admin experience, we actually did some really cool things on that from the side of how you could kind of do that. So you have a membership record, and I'm going to kind of talk through that a little bit and some of the ways that we did it and why we did it the way we did it. But overall, one of the big things was using the content contributor web parts that you have to be able to allow people to submit content versus having to reinvent the wheel and build our own type of thing to be able to control that. One of the reasons is because what happens when they want to add another field or they want to change something. We wanted something that had the built-in technology to just update itself and understand the differences on that side. And so anybody who hasn't looked at the user contribution stuff, if you have users that you need to contribute it, they're very powerful web controls that you can use to be able to manage that process. But overall, when they actually, and they don't come in through the admin interface, they just log into the site, they can actually get to their administrative screen here by navigating to their profile, their member profile, and if you're a member admin, you see a big button up there that says Manage My Membership. You click it and you get brought to this screen where you actually do your work from that side. And so on top of that, then we use the content contributor web part to be able to basically allow them to be able to submit their different content in that. So, and all those had workflow processes behind it. So the client actually had to go through that approval process and that kind of stuff. And so this isn't just limited to press releases, this is events, they have member discounts, but it could really be any type of thing where you want your users to be able to contribute content and actually also then take it through some type of workflow process in your approval steps and that kind of stuff. So a lot of power that you can use this technology for to really be able to do it, and it's all out of the box. There's basically no custom coding here. that we did. It's all out of the box. A lot of the, whether somebody sees a button or doesn't see a button, was based on macros that we utilized from that side. And so the other part of this, and this was probably the most unique thing, we really kind of debated back and forth how to do this. But the reality is the paramount part of this project was manageability from an admin standpoint. Not only from the way the member admins, but what happens if somebody from Automation Alley has to get in and manage something out of their profile. Again, the .NET programmer side of me says, well, I could have very easily built this whole database structure behind the scenes to manage all these different relationships and that kind of stuff, and I could have built the custom forms to do all this kind of stuff and all that. Well, now I'm going to have to build a database interface so that they can go into there, and anybody who's ever done that kind of stuff knows how complex that can really get. And what we're really doing on top of that is we're completely getting out of what Kentico actually does, which is pages in that. So instead what we actually decided to do was we actually decided to build a member template, and that template was a folder with pages and different folders and that kind of stuff inside of it. And so from an automated process side, when they actually click the approval button on a membership application, it actually takes that template, duplicates it, creates the brand new profile, imports all their information into that profile, creates all the structure, builds out all the folders, everything that needs to be part of it, creates the membership record for that year and everything, and puts it all in place. By far the most complex thing I did. There are thousands of lines of code behind this to make all these different pieces work. But overall what it gave them was two things. One, it gave them an automatic member profile build process. Two, now if I need to go find a press release that a member did, I can go into the member structure, switch to list, do a search, it'll take me directly to that press release, and I can go onto that press release and edit it right there. Or I can do something with it right there versus having to go into a database or do some other complex structure. So basically from the admin side, from the standpoint of Automation Alley, we were able to build a system that they could then use the structure they're already using and be able to manage that. From a member admin side, it also gave us the ability to use like the user contribution web parts and those kind of things, because that's what it does, is creates more structure in that. So it ended up where on our side it was a little bit more complex to build. On their side now they have a system that they can literally go into pages and manage things and go into content and manage it versus having it be some really complex structure behind it. So it's actually worked out really well on that side, but from the custom code side it was actually very challenging to do a lot of these things. Even though Kentico's API gives us a lot of power, there's still a lot of steps to be able to do it and clean up things and all that kind of stuff. So there were a lot of pieces that went into here. But overall, this really gave us the power to be able to do that kind of stuff. So on top of that, probably the biggest piece of that was the membership record and that. And so actually being able to see. So with a membership, you actually have the abilities, you know, some of them you can post unlimited press releases and you can post events. Some you can only post, you know, 4 press releases and no events and that kind of stuff. So we actually had to have a flexible membership record that actually allowed them to set that up. And so again, this became an automated thing, but when they do the manual renewals, otherwise the client or one of their members actually call them and say, I'm just going to send you a check, they can actually go and create these records themselves very easily. We tag into the year number and look at the dates that the membership is valid through and do some things behind the scenes, but overall that is there. Where that causes a challenge is everything that shows on the site that has tied to a member has to constantly evaluate, is that member in a current membership year, and does their membership year fall between, otherwise today being 3/18, it needs to be, the membership start date needs to be today or before it, the membership end date needs to be today or after it in that. So there's actually a lot of complex querying that goes behind the scenes to make sure that at all times we're only showing active members information, because somebody's membership could expire, but we don't delete out their profile in there. We want to leave that in place, because what happens if it's somebody that just got in late and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, it's deleted, okay, start over. we can't do that. So we actually have to leave that stuff there. So the delete process is actually a manual thing that Automation Alley would do at the point in time in which they felt like that was necessary. But overall, you needed to do that. And so the cool thing is, and the last part of this is if they selected recurring payments, the payment provider we use, Braintree, actually has what we call a webhook. So otherwise, the processing happens up there. The website has nothing to do with the payments. It just facilitates the payment. But once it goes to the reoccurring, it actually happens at the payment provider, and then it can actually send a message to the website that says, this record renewed, and we have some automated processes then that'll create the new record behind the scenes. So this whole process was by far the most complex piece of this in there. And so the last piece that really goes into it, and again, it's just kind of slowly joining up there, is from a member admin, we also only had certain people that could actually manage membership in that. So I don't know why that, oh yeah, there, it's finally switched. And so the other thing is that as things did, so let's say that I had a low-level membership, and all of a sudden at that low-level membership, I only could post 4 press releases, and I post my 4th. Well, we actually needed to use things to actually then hide the ability to be able to do that kind of stuff. And that's where we really brought in a lot of the macros in that. From a standpoint of an end-user UI and being able to just show, hide something, since you already have these abilities inside the web parts itself to show, hide things based off different things, it just made a lot of sense that instead of building some custom control, we actually built macros that we could actually set as states on top of these different items to say, well, are you going to allow them to add a new item? So from like a press release or an event, I could go back and edit something that I've already posted, but I would no longer have the ability to add a new item. So there was actually a workflow behind the scenes that was incrementing the number, and once you hit that number, you actually then could no longer do that. So that talks a little bit about the membership side of it and just all the complexity that went around there. Events is really where we got into leveraging the e-commerce piece of this and some of the things that we had to do around there. Well, the first thing we had to do from an event standpoint is leverage the event booking page type in that. So if you're not familiar with the event booking page type, there's 2 types of events that you can have in Kentico. Number 1 is just an event, which is basically, you know, set a start date, start time, that kind of stuff, post it up on the site, let it show in a calendar, that kind of thing. The other is event booking, where you can actually use their booking engine to allow people to register and sign up for things and that. A little fun fact for any of the devs out there, you cannot, if you are going to tie into any of the administrative interface side of things, like how the event booking shows in the admin interface, you cannot not use that page type. You can't do your own custom page type and override it in there. I tried for a while, and then we found out actually that it's hard-coded one place in the UI or in the DLLs that you couldn't do so. But overall, their big thing was that they needed to not only leverage that, but they needed to have extensive attendee management. Now, this is one of Automation Alley's main forms of providing a service to their members, in that they have tons and tons of events coming up all the time. Just a lot of different things, and again, both paid and free. So they need to be able to do it. So a lot of what ended up happening is it was taking what we could get out of the events booking module and then actually customizing it from there and doing that kind of stuff. So one of the first things we needed to do was we needed to be able to do paid events in that, something that is not built out of the box from Kentico standpoint. So from a paid event standpoint, one of the really cool things that we did, and it just so happened that just as I got ready to build this, they decided to update the post that one of the guys had done from Kentico with Kentico 7, and he updated it with all the code for Kentico 8, so that was kind of nice for me because I was able to see it. But they actually have how to set up an event as a product. So you can actually set up an event, and you have to actually go back and do some behind-the-scenes coding. This is a code-based type thing that you have to do. But overall, you were able to be able to take an event and actually then be able to give it a price and give it an e-commerce SKU and all the different things that you can do along that. One of our challenges that we had to do was, again, I had said there's the default price, which is somebody who's a visitor to the site that wants to attend an event. And then there's, depending on your membership level, whether you're just a member or you're a foundation member, you a lot of times have different pricing from there. A lot of the events foundation members, which is that really, really expensive membership, actually gets into things for free. Plus, they also had walk-in pricing in that from that side. So we wouldn't have to facilitate that through the e-commerce because that's somebody showing up to the event. But overall, you had a lot of these different scenarios. So we needed to not only extend it now to make an event a product, but then on top of that, we had to extend it now to say, who is this person and what price should I be showing them through the entire process in that. And so this ended up being a very significant piece of the whole puzzle, was being able to do that so that when I logged in and I became a member and I had those type of rights, that I got the type of pricing that I was looking for, which ended up being very important. But the other side that we had to do is we actually had to go in and actually manipulate some of the default admin screens that Kentico provides to be able to show us some of the things that we wanted to do. So again, I know it's not real easy to see on it, but one of the things was that when I actually got into the attendees themselves, I need to know, well, did that attendee pay or did they not pay in that? And so that was one of the things that we had to bring into the equation, and you can't really see it, but overall we have a paid column right in the middle there, and then some of the information about the Automation Alley member themselves. And these were things so that from an administrative standpoint, when an Automation Alley event staff went in there, they could easily see that, and they could see the people that had paid and not paid and that kind of stuff. And so there are scenarios where people might not pay. They might finish something actually going through the checkout process and then get to the payment screen. Well, I'm not going to pay for this. And they now have the facility, since it's a member, to actually reach out to that person and maybe facilitate the rest of the process. So it gives them a lot of feedback, and again, uses the kind of out-of-the-box interfaces for them to be able to see this stuff, but we've extended it by adding our own fields into it and kind of doing our own thing as part of the process. Which leads me to the last part of my whole equation here, which was the e-commerce side. Now, I realize people in the webinar can't do this, but how many people here have leveraged the e-commerce component in that? So, you know, like I said before, I've been doing this for 17 years. And when I first got in, e-commerce was really hot, and then e-commerce kind of died away. And now it's actually making quite the resurgence again out there in the world, that we're actually seeing a lot more organizations wanting to re-leverage. And it was kind of that whole process that when really web technology first started coming up, everybody wanted to host their own web store and do their own thing. And then you kind of had this duration where everybody moved to Yahoo stores and, you know, and going through eBay and everything else, because it was like, well, we're going to outsource and we're going to use these other systems. Well, I've been in IT long enough to see the ebbs and flows that happen all the time. It's kind of like when anybody talks to me about the cloud, I just kind of smirk and laugh a little bit. It's like, you know, to me that's managed hosting. That was in the early 2000s. Everybody went to managed services, and they brought everything back in-house. Now everybody's going to the cloud, and eventually they'll do it. But the cloud's trick is you're putting so much data out there, you're never going to be able to get it back whether you wanted to or not, or you're going to take like 10 years to do it. So from that side. But overall, from an e-commerce standpoint, there's a lot of new things, especially in Kentico 8, to be able to do it. One of the best parts about it was being able to customize the checkout process. So prior to that, the checkout was kind of a single module. If you wanted to go in and actually do anything different with how the steps people went through, all that kind of stuff, you had to get into some massive situations to be able to do that. In Kentico 8, they actually broke out the checkout process into steps, and so you can add your own steps, and it's intelligent enough to know that if I reorder the steps, it's going to go in that direction and all the kind of pieces. Well, one of the big things was, and one of the scenarios that we had to deal with, what happens if somebody signs up more than one person for an event when they add an event to their thing? Well, that's great, and it worked just fine. If I have 3 people and I'm going to pay $20, so I'm going to pay $60. But the first question that we got asked during testing was, well, but what are their names? Because that actually was more important to them than anything, is that they knew who the individuals are, because they've got to check them off their event sheet. So we actually extended the checkout process to add this screen that looked dynamically at what they signed up for, how many people they are, and actually added additional fields. And so actually when this all processes, it actually, in the attendee list in the event booking system, it actually creates a separate record for each person that they're attending the event and that kind of stuff. And so what you can't see very well on the picture is that I always use Fred Durst. Anybody that knows who Fred Durst is? He's like my #1 person that I use on my, but it also automatically fills in the first person, or the person doing the signing up, assuming that that is the person, but overall it gives them an idea of who did it. And so actually the other thing I did in the attendee list was put their name as the attendee, but then also I added another field which was who signed them up in that, so that you actually knew that it was all part of the same order and that kind of stuff. So that was one thing that did it, and so it actually adds that into the final order processing that goes along with that. And then the last component, the custom payment processor. So this was probably one of the most interesting things for me, because I really do need to do a blog post about this, because I love the people at Kentico, but I'm going to say the documentation around this is not something that I love, because I didn't understand what the documentation was saying, why you did some of the things in building a custom e-commerce provider in that, until I actually did it and I figured out what it was and I figured out all the pieces, and then it was like, wow, actually now that I understand this, this is not that difficult, but it's the ability to do it. So there were two things that were very important with this. Number one was being able to do recurring billing. So anybody who has not looked at Braintree, you should look at Braintree. And I'll tell you why. It's got the best interface. It's a company owned by PayPal. And it's got the best e-commerce management interface from its side. You create plans that are recurring plans that go in there, and you can actually manage that. The other thing is, for anybody who's looking to get into e-commerce, I'll give you a little tip. Up until they decide not to, they'll do your first 50,000 in credit card transactions for free. So for anybody that wants to do that, that's a pretty good deal when you think about that. But the reason we looked at this was really two reasons. One, it had the best interface for kind of doing this type of recurring payment and gave them the most flexibility from that side. But number two was the other side, about how we could be informed when that recurring billing did in that. And a lot of the systems that I saw are kind of antiquated in that. Braintree is one of the ones that uses kind of the new webhook technology. And like I said, what the webhook technology is basically, instead of me having to run a process on the website that checks every time a membership goes invalid to see if they renewed, it actually sends it to us. The website sends a signal to the website and says, this person's membership was renewed successfully. And so that is a lot nicer, because you could have somebody that does it earlier, you could have somebody that does it later, and so you're not trying to have any type of time thing, you're actually just saying there. Plus you could think about it, if I had 47 members renewing on the same day, would I have to do 47 calls out there to figure it out, and then if that wasn't, then I'd have to do 47 calls the next day, that kind of stuff. So we were able to really take that out of the equation and say, let the provider actually provide us the stuff. The other thing that happened with the provider that I built that was unique is that I needed to process both paid transactions and free transactions, because there was the possibility that somebody was signing up for events that they didn't have to pay for. We didn't want to create a separate process for them to go through. We still needed to collect all the same information. We still needed to add them to the event attendees, note that they've went through the process and that, but at the same time, we didn't want to charge them a credit card. So we were able to, again, with this custom payment provider, with the built-in ones, you actually can't really, the way that you get around payment process is really, in my mind, convoluted. You have to create like this massive credit bucket, you know, of like $1 billion and increment against that and that kind of stuff, and always take that out. Versus there, where it was like literally the first code that runs on my payment page is there a cost? If no, go away. Just bypass it all, versus just doing the processing and that. So from that side, it just provided a lot of flexibility in that kind of stuff. So now, really the only disadvantage, and I don't know that there's any way to get around it, is if they update a plan or they update pricing in the payment provider, they have to do the same in the Kentico system. Those two don't talk to one another. So there is kind of that step, but that's more of an administrative step. And when you look at it from the standpoint of them being able to do that and only have to manage it in those two places, and they could do that as a process, it just made a lot of sense from that side. So some solid lessons that I learned from this process, and really, like I said, I've been doing Kentico for a long time, but this was really one of the first opportunities that I really got a deep, deep dive into the technology. So actually, I'm going to put another one up here that actually should be number one. If you don't know support.kentico.com, you should have that like bookmarked in your email client, because they're awesome. I mean, they will answer great questions for you. And as a client, you get that all the time. You should always be thinking about that because they will help you through that process. And there were a lot of things that when I would sit there and reflect on the code that they have and try to figure out what it needed to override, I would just send something to them and get up the next morning and I'd have the answer, and it was much easier than that. But that's the big thing, is almost any CMS implementation that goes across past a 5-page website is going to end up needing some kind of customization. And so the thing is to really understand what you need to customize and what you can do out of the box to really have that extensibility piece that you want, so that you don't end up building yourself in a box. You allow content admins to be able to make the changes, but the things that you need to code, you're just going to need to code, and that's the way it is. And just because you can custom dev doesn't mean you should. I see that all the time, and that's because a lot of people in our industry are development shops in that. So the mentality is to develop. Well, the thing is, if there's anything I could ever tell you, is go to Kentico documentation and read through the descriptions of every web part they have. And they have a lot of web parts in that, because there's so many things that you're going to be like, oh, I didn't know they could do that. I could have just dragged that web part on here and did that versus what I did. And that kind of stuff. There's just so much power there to be able to do things. You really need to get yourself familiarized. As a matter of fact, that's one of the pages I've got bookmarked. And a lot of times when I'm trying to look at a new thing, the first thing I do is go to that page and just do a quick little search. Because I want to say it's 80-ish. I'm looking at the other partner guys. I think it's about 80-ish web parts they have now, right? Something like that. It's a very large number of web parts, and they do a lot of different things. You want to put a Twitter icon on there that connects into your Twitter account, they've got a web part to do that, so that you don't have to go and do your own thing. I mean, they've just got a lot of stuff. So you really need to do that. And remember that your humans have to manage this. So if you do everything via custom code, you're going to probably have something where they're complaining to you. And though devs love to code, I know devs love to not hear complaints. So that kind of works in. And the last part is I became a macro believer. And I really do now better myself understand the power of macros in there. The one caveat I'm going to get around this is because I've seen some implementations where macros go crazy, is that unlike server-side code, macros have a cost to performance of the site. Otherwise, when you run a macro on a page, it has a cost to the client side of it, what the client's actually experiencing. And so if you use a lot of macros, and I've seen some pages that have like 10, 15 macros running on it, that's fine probably if one person's accessing that page. When you talk about a scalability standpoint and you're doing all those macros plus you have 100 people accessing or 1,000 people accessing that page at once, there's just some things you need to think about. And so one of the things that it has from an administrative standpoint is a macro. It has a bunch of macro debugging pieces, including where you can see a profiler and actually see how much that cost is taking. And I've seen some macros that really have been built that have like a huge cost to them, as in like a second or two of performance time. And again, one person's accessing that page, who cares? But from scalability standpoint, you always need to be thinking about that kind of stuff. So I wanted to revisit the Kentico user group, just kind of remind you guys that we had, it's going to eventually switch. I swear to God the screen's going to switch. From that side, and say that one of the things, so our next one is in May. Joel Darlene's going to be doing hierarchical transformations. Our hope is that we start moving into a monthly. Our overall hope and goal really is to work with Kentico and really turn this into something that happens all over the country. And so the model we're going to try here for a little bit and see how it goes is this whole model of having a monthly webinar, but then offering, suggesting to partners around the country to have in-person group meetings, and then at the end of that webinar, actually have people have those discussions like we're going to have here in Minnesota right now. And so our hope really is to be able to do that. So feel free to visit the website. It's just a placeholder page right now with very minimal information, but we plan on working with some of the partners that have partnered with us on this stuff and actually trying to take it up to the next level from there. A few other logistical things, just so that you guys know. The next user group meeting, like I said, will be May 13th at 10 a.m. Central Time. Kentico will probably be sending out the webinar information, and that we'll be working with them on that. It's going to be Joel Darlene from Darlene Development, who's going to be doing a presentation to hierarchical viewers. And again, we're trying to go to monthly after that. So if you are interested, if you're on the webinar, you're here, you're interested in doing a presentation, please reach out to Brian Hawkes in our office. He's going to be doing some of the initial coordination just of the presentations. We're not looking this to be a high monkey show, nor even a high monkey, Lane Development, and B-Swing show. We're looking this to be really a community effort. So we're going to be looking for a lot of different speakers around there. Also, Kentico Connection is coming up. They recently kind of announced it. They haven't given specific dates. Hopefully we'll know a little bit more at the partner conference next week. But if you're looking, if you're on the phone from Australia, it's going to be in Melbourne in October. Heck, if anybody here has the company that'll give you the budget to fly there, I'd recommend it. It's a pretty nice place. It's going to actually be in Orlando in early November. That'll be the Americas conference. And then in Brno, Czech Republic in late November. I'm really hoping I'm going to be speaking at a conference in Stockholm in the middle of November, so I'm hoping that it works out well enough that I can speak in Stockholm, go skiing, speak in Brno. So that's kind of my hope. Or I guess it's going to be speak in Orlando, you know, or go to Orlando or whatever. Anyway, I'm really hoping. But anyway, and Brno is where Kentico is located. And I have not been there. I've been to other parts of the Czech Republic, and I'll say it's well worth a trip out there. So again, if you can convince your bosses to send you overseas, probably a really good place to go. A few things too, just because I think that people should know about this. There's some great Kentico resources out there. Devnet, if you've never been on it, the question and answers has really, I mean, just in the last 2 months has taken a gigantic uptick in the number of things. I used to go on there and maybe see one question every few weeks. Now I'm going to say there's probably 10 questions a day on average. And I'm not sure if Brendan's on here, but if he is, you can pretty much know that he'll be the person to answer it first in that, or in my case, after I answer it, he'll be the person to answer it better than what I say. But they also have some great articles. I actually subscribe to the RSS feed, and it comes into my iPad in there, and a lot of things that they're always posting things about good tips and tricks and that kind of stuff that you do it. And then just shameless plug for myself, I'm actually finally, in all my years, in 17 years of doing this job, I finally am getting to do a project that I really, really wanted to, which was actually to build out the ultimate search engine in that. So I'm actually going to be doing a blog series around where I'm actually taking Kentico content and serving it up with SharePoint 2013 search for a public website in that. And so anybody says, why would you use SharePoint? Because SharePoint's back-end search technology is pretty much the most powerful search engine on earth. And so I'm actually doing some really cool things with that right now. And I'm going to put out a series of blog posts that kind of deal with that and may do some webinars down the road for that. So we're just about at the time of the webinar, but I do want to, I don't know if we've had any questions online. Evidently I just did it so well, or I bored them and they all dropped off, one of the two, I'm not sure which, from that side. But we'll leave it open for a couple minutes if anybody has any questions about my presentation. Otherwise, then we'll take a brief break and we can go here in Minnesota. But if anybody online has any questions, feel free to ask them now. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it back over to Eric, who I think is going to wrap us up here.
Yes, thank you very much, Virgil. That was a great presentation. And as you said, it looks like your presentation was overwhelmingly clear, as I don't see any questions that have come in. So I want to thank you for taking the time to share with us what you've done in Kentico and some of the approaches you've used, and hopefully, those who've sat in with us have found some value, some nuggets that they can take away from the meeting or from the presentation that can be used within their own work and their own implementations of Kentico. But coming away from this, if anyone has any questions, certainly you can feel free to reach out to Virgil directly. His information is in the slide that's being presented now. Additionally, we have recorded this session, and we will be making the recording available in the partner portal for further reference or future reference as well. And with that said, again, I want to thank everybody for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.